At that Thanksgiving dinner, right in the middle of our family's old Cajun restaurant in New Orleans, I looked straight at my brother Connor and asked one quiet question. The room went dead silent. His smug smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch, and it never came back. My name is Ralph Vargas. I'm 52. For years, Connor had called me a burden. He'd say it casually in front of the whole family like it was a fact everyone already knew. Ralph's the burden, he'd laugh, raising his glass at holidays or birthdays, while the others nodded or looked away. I'd sit there, fork in hand, feeling the words land heavier each time. I wasn't loud about it. I never argued back. I just kept doing what I'd been doing for almost 2 decades, keeping our mother alive as long as possible, keeping the restaurant running, keeping everything from falling apart while everyone else lived their lives somewhere else. That night, the air in the dining room still smelled like gumbo and cornbread from the last customers. The tables were pushed together into one long one-string lights, dimmed low plates, half empty. Connor was holding court as usual, talking about his big plans for the place now that most of it belonged to him. He kept glancing at me with that same half grin he'd worn since the will was read, like he was waiting for me to finally admit he'd been right all along. I waited until he paused for breath. Then I asked the question. Simple words. Nothing raised voice, no drama, just clear and calm. The second they left my mouth, his face changed. The grin froze, then drained away. Diane stopped mid-sentence. Forks stopped moving. Nobody said a word for what felt like minutes. Connor tried to answer, fumbled, then looked down at his plate. From that moment on, the evening was over in every way that mattered. I didn't raise my voice that night. I didn't storm out or throw anything. I just finally refused to carry the weight they'd all been happy to pile on me. And once I did, everything started to shift, not with fireworks, but with the slow, unstoppable grind of consequences they couldn't outrun. Looking back, I should have seen it coming years earlier, but like a lot of people who spend their lives holding things together for everyone else, I kept telling myself it was temporary. That if I just worked harder, stayed longer, gave more, they'd eventually notice. That night at Thanksgiving proved they never would. And the question I asked wasn't really for Connor. It was for me, the moment I decided I was done proving my worth to people who had already decided what it was. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or carried more than your share, while others took the credit, stay with me. These stories hit hard because they're real. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how the rest of this one played out. Several years before that Thanksgiving, I was living 3 states away in Houston, working a steady job in logistics for a shipping company. The pay was decent, the hours predictable, and I had started to build something that felt like a real career. I was 40, divorced a few years earlier, and raising Aubrey on my own most weekends. Life wasn't exciting, but it was stable, and stability mattered when you're the only parent your kid has. Then the calls from New Orleans started coming more often. My mother, Norma Vargas, had always been the heart of our family restaurant, a small Cajun place on Magazine Street that my grandparents opened back in the 60s. She ran the kitchen, greeted regulars by name, kept the recipes exactly the way customers expected. But around that time, the staff told me she was forgetting orders, mixing up ingredients, leaving the stove on too long. The doctor confirmed early-stage Alzheimer's. It wasn't aggressive yet, but it was progressing. Connor was already deep into his sales career in Atlanta, traveling constantly, closing big deals. Diane lived in Baton Rouge with her husband and kids, managing a bank branch. Both of them came home when they could, but those visits were short, a long weekend here, a holiday there. They'd sit with Mom for a few hours, promise to help more, then head back to their own lives. I got it. They had families, mortgages, promotions on the line, but someone had to be there full time. The restaurant was struggling too. Foot traffic had dropped after Katrina recovery slowed, competition from newer spots increased, and Mom couldn't oversee everything anymore. Bills piled up, The manager we hired quit after 6 months. Regulars asked where Norma was. I flew down every other month at first trying to patch things together remotely, but it wasn't enough. The books were a mess, suppliers were threatening to cut us off, and Mom needed more than occasional check-ins. One evening, after putting Aubrey to bed, I sat at my kitchen table in Houston with a spreadsheet open. I ran the numbers again the way I'd been doing for weeks. If I stayed, I could keep climbing at the shipping company, maybe make supervisor in a couple years, save more for Aubrey's college. If I left, I'd be starting over in a sinking family business, taking care of a parent whose condition would only get worse. There was no safety net, no siblings stepping up to split the load 50-50. I talked to Aubrey about it. She was 12 then, old enough to understand pieces of it. She asked if Grandma would be okay. I told her I didn't know, but someone had to try. She nodded and went back to her homework like it was already decided. Kids accept hard truths faster than adults sometimes. I gave notice at work 2 weeks later. My boss offered a raise to stay. I turned it down, packed what we needed into a rental truck, sublet the Houston apartment, and drove Aubrey and me back to New Orleans for good. We moved into the old upstairs apartment above the restaurant, the one my parents had lived in when we were kids. It smelled the same, like old wood and spice, but everything felt smaller now. The first few months were non-stop. I learned the kitchen line from the remaining cooks, went over every invoice, negotiated with vendors to keep accounts open. Mom still came downstairs most days, sitting at her corner table, smiling at customers who remembered her. She'd forget where she put her keys 10 minutes after setting them down, but she could still taste a roux and tell you if it needed another minute. I leaned on that as long as I could. At night after closing, I'd help her up the stairs, make sure she took her meds, sit with her while she watched her old game shows. Some evenings, she knew exactly who I was. Others, she'd ask when her husband was coming home, like Dad was just out running errands. Those nights hurt the most, but I kept my voice steady. I'd tell her he'd be back soon, then change the subject to something easy like the day's specials. Aubrey adjusted better than I expected. She started middle school in the neighborhood, made friends fast, helped bus tables on weekends for pocket money. Watching her carry trays twice her size just to earn tips made me proud and guilty at the same time. I'd promised her stability, and instead, I'd dragged her into uncertainty. But she never complained. Connor called every few weeks to check in, always from an airport or hotel. He'd ask how things were going, offer advice about marketing or cutting costs, then say he'd try to visit soon. Diane sent care packages for Mom and gift cards for Aubrey. They meant well in their way, but the day-to-day weight stayed on my shoulders. And over the next few years, that weight only grew heavier. As Mom's condition worsened, the days settled into a rhythm that left little room for anything else. I opened the restaurant at 10 every morning, prepped the kitchen, handled lunch rush, then closed for a short break in the afternoon to check on her. Evenings meant dinner service, cleaning up, and finally getting her settled for the night. Sleep came in short stretches, interrupted by her wandering or calling out. I hired a part-time caregiver at first to cover the hours I couldn't, but turnover was high. Most couldn't handle the unpredictability, and the cost ate into what little profit we made. Eventually, I let the last one go and managed alone. It wasn't heroic. It was just what needed doing. The restaurant stayed open because I was there from open to close, tweaking the menu to cut costs, training new cooks, dealing with health inspections, keeping the regulars coming back with the same étouffée they'd loved for decades. Connor built his life farther and farther away. He moved up fast in sales, landing bigger accounts, earning commissions that let him buy a house in a nice Atlanta suburb, take fancy vacations, drive a new SUV every couple years. When he did visit, usually for a quick weekend, he'd walk through the dining room like he was inspecting it, pointing out what could be updated, suggesting we franchise or go upscale. He meant well in his own way, but the suggestions always came with the same underlying message I was stuck holding onto something outdated while he moved forward. At family gatherings, holidays, or birthdays, when everyone made the effort to show up, He'd steer conversations toward his latest deal or promotion. Then, almost casually, he'd turn to me and say things like, "Ralph's the real family man staying here, taking care of everything," with a tone that made it sound less like praise and more like I'd chosen the losing path. He started calling me the burden first as a joke, after a few drinks, then more openly. "Mom's lucky she's got Ralph as the family burden," he'd say, laughing, and others would chuckle along or change the subject. It landed the same way every time, a reminder that my role was the thankless one. Diane saw it differently. She visited more often than Connor, driving down from Baton Rouge with her kids, bringing groceries or new clothes for Mom. She'd help out in the kitchen for a day, then head back to her branch manager job and stable routine. She defended Connor whenever the topic came up, saying he was providing for his own family, building something for the future, that someone had to be the successful one. If I brought up needing more help, she'd remind me that Connor sent money when he could, or that his career demanded travel. Her loyalty to him was clear. She saw his achievements as proof he deserved the spotlight. Mom still had good days scattered in. She'd sit at her old table near the window watching the street, sometimes recognizing longtime customers and chatting with them. On those days, the restaurant felt almost normal, but the bad days grew longer. She'd get agitated at closing time, refuse to go upstairs, accuse staff of stealing from her. I learned to stay calm, redirect her gently, wait it out. The cooks and servers adjusted too, treating her with patience that came from seeing it daily. Aubrey grew up in the middle of it all. By high school, she was handling homework at the corner booth after classes, then jumping in to seat tables or run food during busy nights. She saw the toll it took on me, heard the phone calls from Connor and Diane that rarely led to real help. She never said much, just kept her grades strong and started applying to colleges with good financial aid packages. I tucked away every extra dollar I could for her tuition, knowing the restaurant barely broke even most months. Connor's visits grew shorter over time. He'd fly in for a day, take Mom out for lunch, if she was having a clear moment, post pictures online of the family together, then leave with promises to come back soon. Diane kept in closer touch by phone, coordinating doctor appointments from afar, but always framing things around how busy Connor was with work. Their view of the situation solidified I was the one on the ground, so the daily load was mine by default. The years blurred together that way, one season running into the next, the restaurant surviving on reputation and tight margins, Mom needing more care as her memory slipped further. I stopped expecting anything different from my siblings. It wasn't anger, exactly, more a quiet acceptance that the balance wasn't going to shift. Until Mom finally passed a couple years ago. Mom's final decline came faster than any of us expected. One morning, she didn't wake up as usual. The hospice nurse confirmed it was peaceful in her sleep, no pain at the end. We buried her in the family plot outside the city, a small service with regulars from the restaurant filling the pews alongside us. Connor flew in for the funeral, stayed 3 days, handled some of the arrangements with his usual efficiency. Diane organized the reception back at the restaurant, turning it into a celebration of Mom's life, with her favorite dishes on every table. A week later, the lawyer called us to his office downtown. The 4 of us sat around a polished conference table, me, Connor, Diane, and the executor. He read through the standard clauses first, then got to the distribution. The restaurant building equipment brand, everything 70% to Connor, 20% to me, 10% to Diane. The remaining savings account and life insurance split the same way. Mom had signed the will 2 years earlier during one of her clearer periods with the lawyer and a notary present. The reasoning was typed out in a short letter attached. She believed Connor's business experience would grow the restaurant into something bigger, secure it for future generations. My share acknowledged the care I'd provided, but she didn't want me tied down forever. Diane's portion was smaller because her family was already comfortable. I listened without reacting much. The numbers felt cold, but not entirely surprising. Mom had always praised Connor's drive, seen it as the path to success. she never had. Connor leaned back after the reading, nodding like it all made perfect sense. He thanked the lawyer, shook his hand firmly, then turned to me with a look that said this was validation he'd been waiting for. On the drive back, he started talking plans right away, modernizing the menu, expanding hours, maybe opening a second location. He messaged me later that night with links to design firms asking what I thought about a full rebrand. The excitement in his texts was clear. He saw this as his chance to finally take the wheel. Diane agreed with everything. She called me the next day to say how smart Mom had been trusting Connor to lead. She reminded me that I could step back now, maybe find something less demanding, use my share to travel, or relax. Neither of them asked how I felt about running the place alone for years, only to end up with a minority stake. I kept the doors open, the same as always. The staff relied on steady paychecks, suppliers on regular orders, customers on consistency. Connor lived in Atlanta, so day-to-day decisions still fell to me. I adjusted schedules, fixed equipment when it broke, negotiated with the liquor distributor for better terms. Revenue stayed flat, but we didn't lose ground. I paid myself just enough to cover bills and set the rest aside. Aubrey was starting her junior year of college, by then majoring in biology with an eye on med school. Tuition at a state university wasn't cheap, even in-state, and her scholarships only covered part. Books, lab fees, housing, it added up fast. I covered the gaps from the restaurant's slim profits, dipping into the small inheritance when a semester ran long. She worked summers waiting tables at a campus cafe, but I didn't want her buried in loans before she even started her career. Connor visited every few months, usually with new ideas. He'd walk in during dinner service, greet a few tables like he owned the place already, then pull me aside to talk growth strategies. He posted photos of the dining room on his social media, captioning them about family legacy and exciting changes ahead. Comments poured in congratulating him. He forwarded some to the family chat, adding notes about potential investors he'd met. The pride was unmistakable. Diane backed him fully. She handled the legal paperwork to update ownership records, made sure taxes reflected the new split. Whenever I mentioned ongoing costs, roof repairs, rising insurance, she'd suggest talking to Connor since he had the majority now. It became the default: Connor decides direction, I execute. I didn't fight it openly. Arguing over a will in Louisiana courts would burn through everyone's share in legal fees, and Mom's wishes were clear on paper. Instead, I focused on keeping things running smoothly, making sure Aubrey's application stayed strong, her grades solid. The restaurant became my routine, the one constant after losing Mom. But a few months ago, things with Connor started shifting in a way I hadn't seen coming. Connor's messages changed tone around the beginning of this year. The excited links about rebranding stopped coming. Instead, he started asking detailed questions about monthly revenue, outstanding loans, the building's appraised value. At first, I thought he was just getting more involved as majority owner. Then he mentioned a rough patch at work, lost a major client, commissions dried up for a quarter. He came down for a weekend in the spring, longer than usual. We sat in the back office after closing spreadsheets open. He laid it out plainly: his savings had taken hits from a bad investment mortgage on the Atlanta house, was stretching him thin, credit cards piling up. The restaurant's equity looked like the quickest way out. He proposed listing it with a commercial broker, splitting proceeds according to ownership percentages. Quick cash, no more headaches. I told him I wasn't ready to sell. The place was still turning enough to cover costs and Aubrey's final semesters. A sale would mean staff out of jobs, regulars losing their spot, everything Mom built gone for a one-time payout. He listened, nodded, said he understood, but I could see the frustration in how he gripped his phone. The pressure built slowly over the following weeks. Emails arrived with market analyses showing similar properties selling, fast offers from chains interested in the location. He copied Diane on most of them. She chimed in with practical points: real estate fees, capital gains, taxes. How splitting the money could give everyone a fresh start. Their messages came in waves, sometimes daily, always framed as what was best for the family. Connor called more often late evenings after I'd finished cleanup. He'd talk about buyers he'd spoken to informally, numbers that sounded too good to pass up. When I pushed back, reminding him the restaurant was barely profitable on paper, he'd shift to plan B, me selling my 20% to him outright. He offered a price slightly above appraisal, said it would let me walk away, clean focus on something new. I declined politely at first, saying I needed time to think. The refusals got firmer as the asks grew insistent. He started pointing out repairs the building needed, new HVAC, plumbing updates, costs that would eat into any profit. Suggested cutting staff hours to free up cash for those fixes, or raising prices on signature dishes. I ignored the suggestions and kept operations steady. Tension crept into our conversation, short replies replacing the old easy tone. Diane tried mediating, setting up a three-way call one Sunday afternoon. She laid out compromises: partial sale of the building while leasing back the space, or bringing in a partner to inject cash. Both ideas still ended with me losing control. I thanked her for the effort, but said no. She sighed, said we were all getting older, that holding on too tight wasn't healthy. Connor stayed quiet for most of the call, but I heard him mutter something about stubbornness when we hung up. Aubrey picked up on the strain during her weekend visits home. She'd ask about the late-night calls, notice the new stack of real estate printouts on my desk. I kept details light, told her it was just business talk, nothing to worry about yet. She was finishing her senior year, lining up grad school interviews, and I didn't want this dragging her down. Connor's situation worsened by summer. He confessed over text that he'd taken out a personal loan against his share, using projected sale proceeds as collateral. The lender was pressing for updates. He needed movement soon, or faced higher interest, maybe foreclosure risks on his house. The messages turned urgent, almost pleading, then edged with blame, how my refusal was putting his family at risk. I stopped responding to every thread. When he demanded a formal meeting, I agreed, but only on my terms, in the restaurant during off hours. He showed up, agitated, papers in hand, ready to sign transfer documents if I'd just agreed to his buyout offer. I slid them back. Unsigned, told him the answer was still no. His voice rose for the first time, accusing me of dragging everyone down out of spite. I stayed calm, said this wasn't about spite. It was about not throwing away what I'd kept alive for years. The rift widened after that. Calls went unanswered on both sides for weeks. Diane sent worried texts checking in, but they carried the same underlying push. The pressure didn't let up. It just went quieter, waiting for me to crack. Then came the invitation for Thanksgiving dinner at the restaurant, supposedly to clear the air as a family. Thanksgiving arrived with the restaurant closed to the public for the evening. We'd done a big lunch service, then cleared the tables and set one long one in the middle of the dining room. Diane organized most of it, bringing side dishes from home, while Connor handled the turkey from a caterer he knew. Aubrey came down from school for the weekend, helping me finish prep before everyone else showed up. The place looked warm under the low lights, familiar smells filling the air. We sat down around 7, me at one end, Connor at the other, Diane beside him with her husband and kids, Aubrey next to me. Conversation started: light weather, football scores, how the grandchildren were doing in school. Plates passed around, glasses filled. For a while it felt almost normal, like the old holidays when Mom was still at the head of the table. Connor steered things toward the restaurant soon enough. He talked about the quarter's numbers, how foot traffic held steady despite inflation, then moved into ideas he'd been researching: delivery partnerships, late night hours on weekends. His tone was confident, like he was already running the show full time. Diane nodded along, adding comments about marketing budgets. The kids listened politely. Aubrey stayed quiet, focusing on her food. Then Connor turned directly to me. He set his fork down, leaned forward a bit, and said it was time we all got realistic. The building was sitting on valuable real estate, and holding on to it out of sentiment wasn't doing anyone favors. He looked around the table for agreement. then added that families should support each other, especially when one member was carrying more than his fair share for too long. He smiled as he said it, the same half grin he'd used for years, implying I was the one dragging things down. Diane jumped in smoothly, saying no one wanted conflict, but Connor had a point. Liquidating now would give everyone breathing room, let us all move forward. Her husband agreed quietly. The kids shifted in their seats. Aubrey glanced at me, waiting. I let the words hang for a moment. The clink of silverware slowed. I took a sip of water, set the glass down carefully, then looked straight at Connor. I asked him one simple question. When was the last time you spent a full week here handling inventory payroll and every health department surprise the way I did for 15 years straight? The room went completely still. No one reached for food. No one cleared their throat. Connor's smile froze, then faded. He opened his mouth like he was about to answer, closed it again, eyes dropping to his plate. Diane stared at me, eyebrows raised, then looked away. The grandchildren focused hard on their mashed potatoes. Aubrey sat back, arms crossed, watching. Seconds stretched out. Connor tried to recover, mumbling something about his contributions from afar, sending money when needed, planning the future. But his voice lacked the usual certainty. The words came out flat, unconvincing even to him. Diane tried to smooth it over, saying we all did what we could in different ways, but no one picked up the thread. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The question wasn't angry. It was factual, laying out the reality everyone had ignored for years. Connor's face flushed slightly. He pushed food around his plate without eating. The easy confidence he'd walked in with was gone. No one changed the subject fast enough to save it. Aubrey spoke up once quietly, asking if anyone wanted more gravy, but the attempt fell flat. Conversation stayed dead the rest of the meal. People finished eating quicker than usual, excuses about early bedtimes for the kids coming up soon. Connor avoided eye contact with me entirely. When Diane started clearing plates, he helped without a word. I stayed seated until most were done, then stood to help stack dishes. The evening ended early, hugs at the door, shorter than normal promises to talk soon. That sounded hollow. Connor left first, muttering about traffic back to his hotel. Diane lingered a moment, touching my arm, saying we should all cool off before discussing anything further. I nodded, said goodnight. As the last car pulled away, Aubrey and I turned off the lights and locked up. She didn't ask what came next. She just gave me a small hug before heading upstairs. The quiet in the empty dining room felt different than before, cleaner, like a weight had finally shifted. But the fallout started almost immediately in the days that followed. The next morning, my phone started buzzing early. Diane texted first, asking if we could talk before things got out of hand. I didn't reply right away. Connor called twice, left no voicemail. By noon, a group message appeared with both of them, suggestions for a family meeting. Neutral ground, maybe bring in a mediator. I read it, set the phone down, kept working the lunch shift. Diane showed up at the restaurant that afternoon alone. She waited until the rush slowed, then sat at the counter with a coffee. She started soft, saying the holiday had been tense for everyone, that Connor hadn't meant to come across poorly. She asked me to reconsider his proposal, said selling or restructuring could still work if we compromised. When I stayed quiet, she brought up Mom's memory, how none of us wanted to dishonor what she built. I told her plainly that I was done carrying the load. From now on, decisions about the majority share were Connor's to make and live with. I'd handle day to day until he figured out something else, but no more free advice, no stepping in to fix problems his plans created. Her expression tightened. She said pulling back like that would hurt the business, force hard choices no one wanted. I reminded her the business had survived worse with less input from them. Connor arrived an hour later, unannounced. He looked like he hadn't slept much, tie loosened even though it was a Friday. He pulled me into the office, closed the door. His voice was lower than usual, edged with frustration. He accused me of sabotaging everything over one bad night, said my question had embarrassed him in front of his own family. He demanded I commit to a transition plan, train a manager he'd hire, or agree to a sale timeline. I repeated what I'd told Diane, his 70% his responsibility. If he wanted changes, he could implement them. I wasn't blocking anything legal, just withdrawing my unpaid labor. He raised his voice, then saying I was forcing a fire sale that would leave us all with less. I stayed, even told him that was his call to make. The argument spilled out when Diane joined us. Voices overlapped, her trying to calm him, listing grievances, me restating the same boundary. A couple of servers overheard from the kitchen pass through, pretended not to notice. Finally, Connor stormed out, saying he'd handle it his way. Diane followed, throwing me a disappointed look over her shoulder. Emails started flying that evening. Connor copied a lawyer he'd consulted outlining steps to force a partition sale under Louisiana law for co-owned property. Diane added notes about protecting assets for the grandchildren. The tone was formal threats wrapped in legal language. I forwarded everything to an attorney I'd spoken to months earlier, just in case. The lawyer called me Monday morning. He explained the process: any co-owner could petition court to sell if agreement couldn't be reached. It would drag on discovery phase alone, eating thousands in fees, appraisals, expert witnesses. Even if Connor won the right to sell, closing costs and taxes would shrink proceeds significantly. He advised documenting everything: my contributions over years, current operations, to argue against forced sale if it came to that. Connor filed the petition 2 weeks later. Papers arrived certified mail. Diane signed as co-plaintiff for her 10%. Court dates got set for preliminary hearings. Bills from both sides started stacking up fast: retainers, filing fees, hourly rates. Connor texted once, complaining about how expensive it was getting, asking if I'd drop opposition to save money. I didn't respond. The restaurant kept running through it all. Staff asked quiet questions about rumors. I told them honestly we'd stay open as long as possible. Aubrey called after seeing the family chat blow up, worried about her tuition. I assured her my share was protected for now, that we'd manage. The legal fight dragged into the new year, eating time and cash no one had budgeted for. A little over a year has passed since the court filings turned everything official. The restaurant never recovered from the distraction. Regulars drifted to newer spots down the street. Online reviews mentioned slower service, menu changes that didn't land, staff turnover that left faces unfamiliar. Revenue dropped steadily each quarter. Connor tried hiring a general manager from outside, but the salary ate deeper into margins without fixing the core problems. He ended up moving back to New Orleans part-time, renting an apartment nearby to oversee things himself. The hands-on role didn't suit him. Suppliers called me occasionally, at first asking about late payments I no longer handled. I directed them to Connor. Word spread in the local industry, vendors tightened terms, some demanded cash up front. The reputation Mom spent decades building took hits it couldn't shake off quickly. Connor's personal finances unraveled faster. The forced sale never happened. The judge ruled against partition after reviewing operating history and finding the business viable with proper management. But the legal bills still came due, tens of thousands split across shares. His Atlanta house went on the market last spring, sold at a loss to cover debts. Diane pulled her kids from private school to cut costs. Family chats went silent months ago. No one posted updates anymore. I stepped away completely once the manager was in place. Sold my 20% to a silent investor Connor found, took the check and closed that chapter. No dramatic exit, just paperwork and a final walkthrough to hand over keys. The staff threw a small goodbye gathering after closing one night. I thanked them for years of hard work, wished them well, left before it got emotional. Aubrey graduated in May, debt-free. Her med school acceptance came through shortly after, full ride plus stipend at a program in Texas. We moved into a small house uptown, nothing fancy but ours. She started classes this fall. I took a logistics position with a distribution company here in the city. Regular hours, decent benefits, no nights or weekends on call. The paycheck is steady, the stress manageable. I blocked Connor and Diane's numbers last winter. No angry messages, no final confrontation, just quiet removal from my contacts. Birthdays and holidays pass without cards or calls. Aubrey asked once if I wanted to reach out. I told her it wasn't about holding grudges. It was about protecting the peace we'd finally found. She understood. Looking back at 52, I spent too long believing that proving my worth to family meant absorbing whatever they handed out. That loyalty alone would eventually balance the scales. It didn't. The moment I stopped offering free fixes for problems they created, the imbalance showed itself plain. Connor's plans collapsed under their own weight. Diane's attempts to keep everyone together faded when convenience disappeared. The real cost fell on them. Financial hits damaged credit reputations in local circles that won't recover soon. I lost a business tie but gained sleep time with Aubrey, a life that doesn't revolve around crisis management. My value isn't measured by how much punishment I'll take to keep others comfortable anymore. Sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting harder. It's refusing to play a role you were never fairly compensated for. Once I did that, the rest sorted itself out. Aubrey texts most nights from campus, checking in, sharing small wins. I answer the same way every time, proud of her always. That's the family I focus on now. The rest taught me a hard but clear lesson: your worth isn't up for family vote. Set the boundary, hold it, and let consequences fall where they may.